Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. Good morning to you as well. I did not expect to be up this morning doing this, but as I was making my last episode yesterday, which I thought was going to be the last episode of this spoiler season for me, well, Wizards decided to spoil some really good cards. I mean, this spoiler season, we've already seen the oddly named and incredibly broken Old Stick Fingers. So, yeah, that thing's really powerful. If you haven't seen that episode, make sure you check it out at some point. And we've also seen the incredibly busted Lear Disciple of the Drowned. And yes, again, if you haven't seen this episode, check that one out too, but not until you see, oh my goodness, this card. Because this episode is on Lord of the Forsaken, which, yeah, is most definitely a broken card as well, and it is reminiscent of a card that is currently banned in Commander for good reason. So what exactly is this broken card and what does it do? Well, let's jump into it to find out. So, Lord of the Forsaken is a 6/6 demon with Flample, or Flying and Trample, that costs 4 black. It has pay a black, sacrifice another creature, target player mills 3 cards. Now, that part is good, but that's not the broken part. The broken part is most definitely pay 1 life, add colorless. Spend this mana only to cast a spell from your graveyard. Now, I am really happy that they included that last part, because if they didn't, this thing would probably see a ban the second that it was spoiled. But yeah, this card is still incredibly broken even with that restriction. In a format like Commander, where you start off with 40 life, life is an abundant resource. So being able to freely exchange that abundant resource for mana is overpowered and absolutely broken. And like I mentioned before, that ability is most definitely reminiscent of a card that is currently banned in Commander. And actually, it's never going to be unbanned. There is no way this card will ever be unbanned, and we'll talk about what exactly that card is here in a bit. Regardless, even with that restriction again, spend this mana only to cast a spell from your graveyard, there are still plenty of incredibly overpowered and broken things that you can do. Basically, at a certain point, the equation becomes, do you have more life than your opponents? Okay, you win. And actually, in some scenarios, that doesn't even matter. So yeah, we'll talk about some cards that can help out with that. But of course, first up, let's talk about that comparable card that is banned. And that card, of course, would be Channel. Channel is a sorcery for green and says, until end of turn, anytime you could activate a mana ability, you may pay 1 life. If you do, add colors to your mana pool. Basically, exchange life for free mana. Yeah, there's a reason that this is banned. How about a turn 2 or even a turn 1 Eldrazi? Or, just cast Exsanguinate or Torment of Hailfire. And yeah, there are plenty of ways to win with this card. Yeah, just being able to freely exchange life for mana is an extremely broken and extremely ban-worthy thing. Like I mentioned earlier, Channel is banned in Commander, it's banned in Legacy, and it's even restricted in Vintage. Basically, you can't play this card anywhere outside of Limited and, again, the 1 copy in Vintage. I mean, there's a key difference again between Channel, though, and Lord of the Forsaken in that you are restricted to only being able to spend the mana to cast a spell from your graveyard. That being said, unlike Channel, Lord of the Forsaken is not a one-off effect, and as long as it sticks around, you can do that life exchange for mana whenever you want. I mean, another card that Lord of the Forsaken most definitely reminded me of was Carrick, Son of Yawgmoth. Carrick has for each black and a mana cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. Essentially, it turns all of your black pips into Phyrexian mana. So for each one of those pips, you're exchanging 2 life instead of actually paying the mana cost, which again is an extremely powerful thing, and there are some incredibly broken things that you can do with this. Now obviously, Carrick doesn't have that restriction of only being able to cast spells from your graveyard with this, but in a way they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Carrick deals with pips, whereas Lord of the Forsaken deals with the generic mana or an X cost. And speaking of X spells, once you're set up correctly, of course you can easily win the game with something like Cut to Ribbons in your graveyard. Ribbons is a sorcery for X black, and it has Aftermath, so you can cast this spell only from your graveyard. And it of course says each opponent loses X life. So it's kind of like an exsanguinate from your graveyard, but without the life gain. So as long as you've got 2 black mana, more life than your opponents, and you cast this and they don't counter it, well, your opponents lose. Because even if your opponents are each at, say, 40 life, but you're at 41, you just pay 40 life, put 40 into that X, and drain them out. You might be at 1 life, but that doesn't matter because they're at 0. So yeah, of course there are some incredibly broken things that you can do with Lord of the Forsaken. Being able to freely exchange life for mana, even with a restriction of just being able to cast spells from your graveyard with it, is incredibly powerful. And while Cut to Ribbons is probably your best win condition with this, it's definitely not your only one. I mean, there's also the flashback spell Devil's Play, which is going to deal X damage to any target. Now, while this might only take out 1 player, of course you can flashback something like Increasing Vengeance, and yeah, now you can take out all 3. Because Increasing Vengeance is going to copy that spell twice since you flashed it back. So again, if you can fill up your graveyard, you've got a lot of options on how you can go about winning. And speaking of filling up your graveyard, let's talk about a fantastic card in combination with Lord of the Forsaken with Increasing Confusion. It's got a flashback cost of X and a blue, and it says target player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, but if Increasing Confusion was cast from a graveyard, that player puts twice that many of those cards into their graveyard instead. So when you flash this back, you mill yourself for X times 2. Now, actually, you can utilize this to finish off an opponent as well by milling them out, but yeah, you can also just use this to set yourself up for a huge turn by milling yourself for a ton. Again, by doing so, you give yourself access to spells that have, flashback or jumpstart or again, aftermath. And of course, there are also ways to be a bit more specific to get the exact card that you want. For example, let's talk about Increasing Ambition, Mystical Teachings, and Entomb. Increasing Ambition has a flashback cost of 7 and a black, and if you cast it from your graveyard, you get to search your library for 2 cards and put those into your hand, then shuffle your library. So again, with Lord of the Forsaken in play, this is, hey, pay a black mana and 7 life, go tutor for 2 cards. And then Mystical Teachings has flashback for 5 and a black, and it says search your library for an instant card or a card with flash, reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle your library. Now this is a more specific tutor, but it can still go get you Entomb, which says search your library for a card, put that card in your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Again, if you just go get Cut to Ribbons and you've got more life than your opponent still, they lose. Again, assuming that they don't counter it. Still, you know what I mean. And of course, there are ways to pretty much cast anything from your graveyard with things like Past in Flames, Yawgmoth's Will, and Gaia's Will. Past in Flames says each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, and of course it's got a flashback cost of 4 and a red. So with this, any instant or sorcery in your graveyard can now be recast with help from Lord of the Forsaken. And then Yawgmoth's Will takes us a step further, again a card that is banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage for a reason, but it is actually legal in Commander. Its Oracle text reads, until end of turn you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard. If a card you put in your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile that card instead. Basically, your graveyard is your hand, so have fun. And Gaia's Will does the exact same thing, but it's got to spend 4 for a green, so you've actually got to wait a while for this to happen. Regardless, if you get access to casting most or all of your spells from your graveyard, good luck to your opponents. Because, like I've said, there are plenty of overpowered and broken things that you can do with Lord of the Forsaken. And actually, to fuel Lord of the Forsaken and to ensure that you've got enough life to win, you can utilize flashback cards like Gnaw to the Bone and Ancestral Tribute. Gnaw to the Bone is going to gain you 2 life for each creature card in your graveyard. So yeah, if you've got a self-milled deck where you're milling yourself for a ton and getting a lot of creatures in your graveyard, this can gain you a lot of life for basically no mana. Again, with Lord of the Forsaken in play, this just cost a green and 2 life. And again, with enough creatures in play, you're going to be gaining a lot more life than that. And speaking of gaining a lot of life, how about Ancestral Tribute? It's got a flashback cost that's a lot higher at 9 white, but also has the potential to gain you a lot more life. Because instead of just gaining you 2 life for each creature in your graveyard, it gains you 2 life for every single card in your graveyard. So yeah, if you can pay for this, you can easily gain enough life to basically do whatever you want with Lord of the Forsaken. And of course, there's even a flashback card that can get you back Lord of the Forsaken too with Unburial Rites. For 3 and a white, you can return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So again, even if this and Lord of the Forsaken are both in your graveyard, you can still easily win. Just flash this back, get Lord of the Forsaken out, and have fun. And you know what? Why not just throw Chromatic Orrery into your deck as well? It says you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. So although Lord of the Forsaken is restricted to just giving you colorless mana, now that doesn't matter. Now you can completely pay for any flashback or jumpstart or aftermath card in your graveyard with life instead of mana. You don't even have to pay for the pips. So yeah, have fun with that. But now let's move on and talk about some commanders that actually might want this card in the 99 of their decks. First up, how about Cast Dissident Mage? Cast says during each of your turns you may cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. If a card cast this way put in your graveyard, exile it instead. Cast is looking to cast a lot of spells, including spells in the graveyard, so yeah, giving you access to extra instant sorceries in your graveyard is a great thing for Lord of the Forsaken. Next up, how about a self-mill commander like Tassiger the Golden Fang? Many Tassiger decks out there can get a lot of cards in their graveyard very quickly and prune their graveyard with that delve to ensure that their opponents don't get the best choices. But again, with the right deck built around this, you can get the exact cards in your graveyard that you want, and Lord of the Forsaken can help you cast a lot of those cards with flashback or aftermath or again jumpstart, those kind of things that you can cast from your graveyard. Another option might be Taigam Sidisi's Hand. Taigam makes you skip your draw step at the beginning of your upkeep. You look at the top 3 cards of your library and put one of them in your hand and the rest in your graveyard. So a self-mill commander like this one can get the right cards into your graveyard that you're going to want for Lord of the Forsaken. And finally, Sidisi herself might want Lord of the Forsaken as well, but actually for a different reason. Sidisi has whenever one or more creature cards are put in your graveyard from your library, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. Yeah, remember that Lord of the Forsaken also has pay a black, sacrifice another creature, target player mills 3 cards? Yeah, have fun with that in this deck. Pay a black, sacrifice a zombie, mill yourself for 3. Hit a creature with that mill, make a zombie. Of course, if you've got other death triggers on the board, which you're most likely going to have, you're going to get a lot of value out of this. And again, of course, if you've got things in your graveyard that you can cast, Lord of the Forsaken can obviously help you with that. But now as this episode is wrapping up, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Lord of the Forsaken. And like I've said many times in this episode, this card, which is reminiscent of a card that is currently banned in Commander and will never be unbanned, is incredibly broken. Again, with the right deck built around it, you can easily win the game the second this card comes into play. As long as you've got more life than your opponents, and sometimes that doesn't even matter, you're gonna win. Now, do I personally expect this card to be banned because Channel is banned? No. I could be wrong, but I think that restriction, again, spend this mana only to cast a spell from your graveyard, is going to save this card from a ban. If that restriction wasn't there, I most definitely think this card would be banned. So to me, this card is most definitely broken, but not ban-worthy. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again, and have a good one.